Santa Cruz County, California, IA. Late 70s. Behind closed doors and quiet neighborhoods, fear crept into bedrooms where people believed they were the safest. Windows became points of entry, shadows became threats, and the night itself turned hostile. For years, a predator moved silently through coastal communities, watching, waiting, learning routines, and didn't strike at random. He stalked with patience, planning each intrusion with chilling precision. Victims would later describe the same terrifying pattern: a sudden presence, a violent struggle, and a stranger who vanished just as quickly as he appeared, leaving trauma, unanswered questions, and a community desperate for protection. Law enforcement faced a nightmare: multiple attacks, little physical evidence, and a suspect who blended into everyday life. A man who worked, socialized, who appeared unremarkable while hiding a violent double life. This is the story of Gerald Parker, known to investigators and the media as the Bedroom Basher, a case that would test forensic science, challenge police procedure, and forever change how serial violent assault investigations were conducted. This video is made for educational and awareness purposes only. All information comes from publicly available sources. Hey, what's up, yo? It's me, I'm
Bad Ape.
And we're back at it to do it again.
Bad Ape.
Kick it over here, baby pop!
Alright, fam, quick time out. California has plenty of amazing places to visit. Unfortunately, fam, this case isn't one of them. And for obvious reasons, there's going to be some things that we can't touch. I'm going to do my best to talk around it though, but I can't get too deep into it. You'll see why. Normally, this is where we talk about beautiful beaches, amazing foods, spectacular drinks, maybe a scenic overlook or a must-try local restaurant, but not today. This is California's Bedroom Basher case. The only local flavor in this story is fear, forensic evidence, and a man who absolutely ruined nighttime for an entire county. So instead of our top 5, we're going to get into police reports, DNA breakthroughs, courtroom testimony, and a reminder. Did you check the doors and windows and set the alarm? Nah? Damn. Alright, I got it. Alright, so now we understand that Gerald Parker is known as the Bedroom Basher for a string of multiple violent assaults that ended with taking the lives of several of the victims, including an unborn child, and leaving the husband of one of the victims wrongfully convicted, and he spent nearly 17 years in prison until DNA evidence proved Parker was the guilty party. And now that we've cleared that up, back to the investigation. But our research don't stop. Oh, well, damn. I can't even hit you with that one. Huh. Well.
Drop!
Alright, well, I guess I can go with, and this is where our story begins. Gerald Parker was born in 1955. He lived with his family in Phoenix, Arizona. In 1963, his mother, Frankie Wagner Parker, she passed while giving birth to her 10th child. And at the age of 8 years old, the father decided to abandon the family. So as far as that goes, he was out. He out of here. The grandparents did what they could by taking in Parker and a few of the siblings. And over the 5 months he was there, of course, he proved to be too much for the grandparents. He was sent to juvenile hall for sniffing glue and a host of other troubling issues. And shortly thereafter, he and his brother were sent to live with another relative, an older cousin, Florence Russell in Logan Heights. Although much of his youth was spent in an all-boys institution for troubled adolescents, in 71, he was presented with a work experience reward for food preparation, and the following year, he was a runner-up for the Chino Rotary Club's annual Crombie Allen Award. And his cousin Russell said he never gave her any problems at all. In 1973, Parker joined the Marines.
But until that day, you are pukes. You are the lowest form of life on earth. Do you maggots understand that? Sir, yes, sir. Bullshit, I can't hear you.
And trained at Camp Pendleton in San Diego. By July, he was sent to Adak Naval Air Facility, where he would spend the next year serving as a barracks security guard. Afterwards, he was transferred to North Carolina, then Mississippi, and by September of 1975, he would land in Tustin, Orange County, California. By late 1979, he would serve as a Marine Staff Sergeant at the Air Station El Toro. By the following year, he was dishonorably discharged following a felony conviction. On December 1st, 1978, in Anaheim, and according to Parker's own testimony, Gerald entered the apartment of 17-year-old Sandra Fry through an open window in the bedroom. He was carrying a 2x4, and without notice, he struck Fry several times, fracturing her skull. His intentions was to violently assault Fry, but Parker was dealing with some ED issues. Yeah, you heard me right. He was dealing with some ED issues, and he was unable to perform, but he managed to leave his DNA on her body and fled the scene. When Fry's roommate returned home, she checked in on her and noticed she was lying in an unnatural position.
Oh my God, what is that?
As she had gotten closer to Fry, she was met with the horrific aftermath of the perpetrator. Unsure if the assailant was still on the premises, she fled the apartment. Police were contacted. Fry was transported to the hospital where she was officially pronounced departed. By April 1st, 1979, this is no April Fool's. Parker had already scoped out his next target, and he struck in Costa Mesa, where he simply walked through the front door of the apartment left unlocked of 21-year-old Kimberly Rawlings. And Parker was armed with another 2x4 piece of wood. He struck Rawlings without mercy, hitting her several times and violently assaulting her. And in the window of about 4 hours, she was found already departed by her roommate. During the autopsy, the coroner was able to collect and properly store DNA from feminine hygiene protection Rawlings was wearing at the time of her attack. July 19th, 1979, Gerald is again hunting in the Costa Mesa area, and he located the apartment of 24-year-old Jane Pentingill. He gained access through an unlocked window in the dining room. Using a blunt object, he struck Jane, hitting her over the head several times, and he continued his assault on her right there, right where she fell. Within a few hours, one of Jane's friends stopped by and found her crumbled and broken body. They dialed 911.
911, what's your emergency?
Jane was taken to the hospital where they had performed routine checks and DNA was collected. By this time, investigators knew what they were dealing with, as the sample would be tested and confirmed matched to DNA collected from several other cases where the victims weren't left breathing after the attack. Pentingill, suffering a fractured skull, would spend more than a month in a coma, and she would require a permanent tracheotomy. On September 15, 1979, in the early morning hours, Parker, once again stalking the Costa Mesa area, and entered the apartment through an unlocked sliding glass door of 31-year-old Marilyn Carleton. Gerald Parker viciously beat Carleton, causing severe head injuries, which would later claim her life as a result of the attack. This horrific crime was witnessed by Marilyn Carleton's own 9-year-old son, who would give a full description of the attacker to law enforcement. And roughly 3 weeks later, on September 30th, 1979, Gerald Parker would walk through the unlocked front door of 20-year-old nurse Diana Green's apartment in Tustin. Green was 9 months pregnant, and Parker struck her in the head with so much force, she was knocked unconscious. She was violently assaulted. When her body was discovered, EMTs arrived on the scene. They observed a hole so deep in Diana's forehead you could see her brain matter. Green spent weeks in a coma, and upon regaining consciousness, she had total amnesia. She couldn't recall anything, and the child she was carrying, named Chantel Marie Green, she was delivered stillborn as a result of the attack. And her husband, Kevin Green? Well, he was arrested for the attack. During Kevin Green's trial, Diana testified that her husband attacked her. She knew that the two had an argument over intimacy. The attack stemmed from her refusal of all of the intimate advances and wasn't in the mood.
I'm not in the mood.
For someone who couldn't recall anything, you recalled that much, but amnesia has a funny way of coming and going, and you remember bits and pieces. Diana was adamant. She was confident. So there's that. Kevin Green was since convicted.
I didn't kill my wife. I don't care.
And sentenced to life imprisonment. However, the swabs obtained from Diana Green the night of the assault would later match to Gerald Parker's DNA profile, but that won't be for years down the line. But as for now, Kev, you going behind the wall, baby bear. I'll holler at you. July 19th, 1979, Gerald is again hunting in the Costa Mesa area. And he located the apartment of 24-year-old Jane Pentingill. He gained access through an unlocked window in the dining room. Using a blunt object, he struck Jane, hitting her over the head several times. And he continued his assault on her right there, right where she fell. Within a few hours, one of Jane's friends stopped by and found her crumbled and broken body. They dialed 911.
911, what's your emergency?
Jane was taken to the hospital where they had performed routine checks and DNA was collected. By this time, investigators knew what they were dealing with, as the sample would be tested and confirmed matched to DNA collected from several other cases where the victims weren't left breathing after the attack. Pentingill, suffering a fractured skull, would spend more than a month in a coma, and she would require a permanent tracheotomy. On October 6, 1979, Gerald was once again prowling in the Costa Mesa area. And this time, he's armed with the mallet he had taken from the truck. He already had his eyes on the apartment of 24-year-old Deborah Kennedy. He snuck in through the bedroom window and stood over her while she slept on the couch. Then he struck her over the head. She never knew what hit her. He continued his strikes. While suffering severe head trauma and a brain hemorrhage, he continued his assault on Deborah Kennedy. Within hours, she would pass as a result of her injuries. By this time, aside from his DNA, he avoided leaving behind any incriminating evidence. Now remember, this is the 1970s. And forensics as we know it today is still a far way off. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, the folks working behind the scenes dealing with all of the forensics, they were collecting anything and everything such as bodily fluids, nail clippings from the remains of the departed. And they were able to lift a solid palm print that he left at one of the other crime scenes. So this means they're actually building a solid profile of the perpetrator. Nonetheless, inside of a 14-day window, Gerald would strike again. October 20th, 1979, Parker had already targeted the empty apartment of the 17-year-old Deborah Lynn Sr. Gerald, pretending he was a jogger in the area, made his way inside the quiet abode through a bathroom window. He waited for Senior to get home. Once she was inside the apartment, he ambushed her, struck her several times over the head with a blunt instrument. She was out cold. Parker carried her unconscious body into the bedroom. This is where he would continue his assault on the 17-year-old. Once he was finished, he fled. And shortly after, her roommate returned home. Finding the remains of the 17-year-old Deborah Sr., she raised the alarm, called 911. EMTs officially pronounced Deborah departed on the scene. While some folks were just getting over ushering in a brand new year, the 1980s. February 1980, Ada Demirion was in the underground parking garage of her apartment complex when Parker appeared from nowhere and struck her numerous times with a metal pipe. After dragging her limp body several feet to one of the darker areas, he ripped off her necklace and other jewelry. He rummaged through her purse, taking other items. Unbeknownst to Parker, Ada had already regained consciousness. By the time Parker reached his hand up her skirt, Demirion made it to her feet and ran to the manager's apartment on the first floor. While banging on the apartment door and bleeding profusely, Ada passed out. Gerald didn't know someone was watching him as he stood over Demirion. The witness yelled at him,
What the hell are you? No! No! No!
Parker ran off and managed to get away. EMTs arrived on the scene, rendering aid to Demirion. During transport from the apartment complex to the hospital, EMTs realized that Demirion's fingers were so swollen from protecting her head during the attack, they had to cut off her rings to treat all of her injuries. Back at the apartment complex, police are canvassing the area, looking for anyone who fits the description provided by the witnesses. Well, what do you know? About a block away, as Parker was making his escape, Parker was crossing the street and walks right in front of a squad car. The officer noticed blood on Parker's clothing and hands. Sir, step over here by the car, sir. Parker was detained and questioned. And when they asked for ID, Parker produced his Marine Corps identification card. Once the witnesses indicated Parker looked like the suspect, Gerald Parker was taken into custody. The officer noted that Parker did not appear to be intoxicated and his demeanor was calm and cooperative. Another officer located the bloody pipe, which was 8 inches long and 3 inches in diameter. Near the pipe was a gold pearl necklace. 9 months after the attack, October 2nd, 1980, Parker was convicted in Los Angeles in a superior court of robbing Demirion and a great bodily injury inflicted upon her during the commission of a robbery. Only 2 weeks after the attack on Ada Demirion, February 15th, 1980 in Tustin, a young 13-year-old who attended her father's funeral earlier that day, and while walking home from the convenience store, she noticed a black van drove past her. And a little further down the street, it pulled over. She saw Parker get out of the driver's side of the van, opened the door, and walked around the vehicle checking the tires. As the 13-year-old walked by, Gerald Parker pounced on her, grabbed her by the sweater, punched her in the face, and then threw her in the back of the van. After driving for about 30 minutes or so, Parker pulled into a shopping center parking lot. He closed the partition separating the compartments from the front and back of the van. He asked the 13-year-old, had she ever been violated before? Of course, the 13-year-old replied, no. Parker responded by saying, well, this is what it is like. He tore a towel into strips, binding her hands, and stuffed some of the cloth in her mouth and one strip around her head. Once he was finished with the violation, he asked the 13-year-old what she had in the bag, and if she would tell her parents, and if she would be able to identify him in a police lineup. The 13-year-old replied no to the last two questions. He then drove to an alley and dropped her off. The 13-year-old made mental notes about certain details about the van, about Gerald Parker, and when she got home, she told her mother what happened. They dialed 911. 911,
what's your emergency?
3 days later, an investigator from the Orange County Sheriff's Department contacted military police at Marine Corps Air Station El Toro. They gave a description of Parker and shared pertinent details of the investigation. Parker was called in for questioning, and before investigators could show the 13-year-old a picture of Parker, he had already confessed. Parker admitted that if the 13-year-old had been a little older, he probably would have killed her. On May 13, 1980, Parker was convicted in Orange County Superior Court of the kidnapping and physical violation of the 13-year-old. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Parker was only known as the bludgeon killer because at the time, none of the homicides in the area or anywhere at that time were linked to him. And at that point, they only had a genetic profile, but nothing to compare it to. But they were aware that the bludgeon killer had a strong desire of controlling women and violent behavior and was likely unintelligent and insecure. The investigation extended into the 1980s, and a handful of suspects were looked at, but all were dismissed. By 1996, all of the homicides were considered cold cases. However, by June of 1996, DNA samples that were collected from several crime scenes from the 70s and 80s were being retested through the database using new technology that can match DNA samples of convicted criminals with evidence of unsolved crimes. Investigators were able to link several unsolved homicides. And guess what, fam?
Our survey said
They all hit. The samples came back to a confirmed match. Gerald Parker. On June 14th, detectives met with Parker in the Avenal State Prison in Central Valley where he was imprisoned for a parole violation. It was there he confessed to 5 homicides and the assault on Diana Diallo. He also confessed to other crimes not previously linked to the bludgeon killer. Parker gave investigators details that weren't released to the public and only the perpetrator would know, in which Kevin Lee Green was exonerated and released from prison after more than 16 years. On June 20th, 1996, Superior Court Judge Robert Fitzgerald apologized for Green's wrongful incarceration and declared him a free and innocent man. Ever since he was arrested, Green proclaimed his innocence. He even passed a defense-administered polygraph test before the trial. While incarcerated, Kevin Lee Green tried to have a DNA test performed on the seminal fluid investigators collected at the crime scene. Unfortunately, he could not afford the costly forensic procedure. Luckily, crucial evidence from the Diallo attack had not been destroyed and could be tested. When his guilt was brought into question, once exonerated, the ex-Marine Corporal Kevin Lee Green went to visit his family in the Midwest and said, quote, "I do not plan to sue the state for damages resulting from this wrongful conviction," end quote. Oh man, you better than me. Diallo has maintained in the past she still believed that her ex-husband, Kevin Lee Green, was the sole attacker that night, despite Gerald Parker's admission and the latest technology at that time that clearly exonerated her ex-husband. He had nothing to do with it. He admitted they did have an argument and he did storm out of the house. The jurors refused to believe his alibi that he went to get a cheeseburger. His ex-wife, Diana Diallo, she still partially blames her ex-husband for their baby's death. She has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against her ex-husband and reiterated her claim, quote, "I feel I've been beaten and violated by two men, by a stranger and by a man who I loved and trusted," end quote, Diallo said in court. Guess what, Kevy Kev? Sometimes, man, even 17 years, not enough, bruh. Damn.
Him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back.
In handing down the sentence, Orange County Superior Court Judge Francisco P. Brasino told Parker, quote, "Inhumane behavior is beyond belief," end quote, and rejected defense arguments that Parker's life should be spared because he was a drug addict and came from a troubled background. Family members of the victims who addressed the court said the end to the long-running case would help bring closure, but that they remained emotionally crushed by the brutal and horrific homicides. Parker, quote, "will have a peaceful death," end quote, by lethal injection, said by Jackie Bisonnet, whose sister, Deborah Lynn Sr., 17, was amongst Parker's victims. Quote, "Our sisters, daughters, and friends were left bleeding to die," end quote. Victim Deborah Kennedy's sister, Ann Jones, said, quote, "Her younger sister's murder has had a devastating effect on the whole family," end quote. Jones said that even after all these years, she still doesn't leave the window open or answer the phone when her husband is not around, end quote. Another relative said, quote, "I think the fears that I feel will always be with me." She also went on to say, "I am trying to get over this, but I am not sure that I ever will," end quote. Jones said her 24-year-old sister was a warm and loving person, and that knowing that her killer has finally been found, convicted, and sentenced brings some respite. In that aspect, it is closure, end quote, she told the court. On June 21st, 1996, Parker was charged with 6 counts. Owing to California statute of limitations on pre-1990 physical assault cases, Parker could not be charged with the 1979 attack on Jane Penningill, despite DNA identifying him as the assailant. DNA experts testify at the trial that samples taken from Parker's blood compared with the evidence collected at the scenes were indistinguishable from each other. In September, it was announced that the death penalty was being sought for Parker. On October 20th, 1998, after only 2 hours of deliberations, Parker was convicted on 6 counts of first degree, including special circumstances, which made him eligible for the death penalty. During the sentencing phase of his trial, Parker accepted full responsibility and stated, quote, "If my life is what it takes for them to feel that their family members have been vindicated, then that is what I believe should be done. My life should be taken away from me," end quote. The nerve of this guy, right? Come on, man. Stop it, 5. Stop it. On November 12th, 1998, the jury recommended that Parker be put to death. Parker was ordered to San Quentin State Prison to await execution by having a date with the needle. While Parker is currently on death row in San Quentin State Prison awaiting execution, his lawyers appealed for the nullification of his death sentence and for a new trial, arguing that Parker was mentally disturbed at the time of the homicides as a result of him being bullied as a child combined with abuse of drugs and alcohol. However, that appeal was righteously rejected. Get him out of here. The arrest of Gerald Parker didn't erase the fear he created. It didn't undo the nights of sheer terror or lives permanently altered by his crimes. But it did bring answers through persistence, emerging forensic techniques, and the courage of survivors who came forward. Investigators finally unmasked a man who relied on silence and invisibility to continue his attacks. Behind every case file, behind every headline, are lives forever changed. The victims of the bedroom basher were not statistics. They were daughters, partners, friends, neighbors, people who trusted the quiet of their homes and the safety of the night. Each attack left more than physical wounds. It shattered a sense of security. It stole peace. And it forced survivors to carry memories no one should ever have to endure. For years, these victims lived with unanswered questions, wondering if the man who violated their lives would ever be held accountable. Some carried their trauma in silence. Others found the strength to speak, to testify, and to confront the fear that followed them long after the attacks ended. Their courage mattered. Because of their resilience, patterns were recognized, evidence was preserved, and justice, though delayed, was eventually served. This moment isn't about the man who committed the crimes. It's more about those who survived and those whose lives were permanently altered. We honor their strength, we acknowledge their pain, and we remember that justice exists because victims refuse to be forgotten. May their voices continue to be heard. Straight up, may their courage never be overlooked. Gerald Parker was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. His freedom taken, but the scars he left behind remain. The bedroom basher case became more than a prosecution. It became a turning point, highlighting the importance of DNA evidence, victim advocacy, and interagency cooperation. Most importantly, it stands as a reminder. Evil don't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. Injustice, though delayed, can still find its way into the darkest rooms.
Oh no!
Okay, it's about that time. Subscribe, like, comment, share. You know the drill. And thank you for riding with
Bad Ape.
And until we see you on the next one.
Bad Ape.